Welcome, thoughtful traveler. Tonight, we shall not wade through the noise of conquest or the clang hour of crowns. Instead, let us walk slowly barefoot in the quiet corridors of history, where dust gathers not in neglect, but in memory. Let the weight of the day slip from your shoulders. Let your mind soften, like parchment under candlelight. You are safe here. The world we visit tonight has been called many names. Some whisper it was dark, others say it was lost. But the truth lies not in the loud labels of centuries past, but in the silence between them. Let us listen together. Let your eyelids grow heavy, and your thoughts drift gently, not into dreams, but into a distant past. It is late. The world outside is hushed. The ticking of the clock is steady, soft like footsteps in a monastery corridor. And as your body settles, your mind reaches for something calm, something quietly compelling to hold on to. So, let us take a journey, not into fantasy, but into history. A history misunderstood, misnamed, and often maligned. You see, the Middle Ages were never as dark as you've been told. That label, the Dark Ages, was painted by 19th century hands, men in tall hats and thick books, who believed that once the Roman Empire withdrew its legions and laws from distant lands, all light had gone out across Europe. They imagined a world left behind in ruin. Cities crumbling, roads untended, people stumbling in ignorance under the weight of forgotten glory. But that is not the whole story. Not even close. And so, as you rest here now, safe, still, and quiet, let us gently unpick that narrative. Let us walk together down the worn paths of time, past the marble shadows of fallen Rome, and into a world not of darkness, but of subtle light, of change, of resilience, of monks preserving knowledge by candlelight, of villages reshaping their lives after the great pestilence, of nights and markets, and songs sung in ancient dialect. The truth of the Middle Ages is not loud. It doesn't need to be. It waits in silence, like a story patiently unfolding beside a warm hearth on a long, sleepless night. The Middle Ages aren't the worst epoch in modern history, not by any thoughtful measure, and certainly not by the truths whispered between the lines of chronicles and stone. The popular term Dark Ages is a misnomer, one crafted more by the anxieties and arrogance of 19th century historians than by the realities of the medieval world itself. These scholars, peering backward through the lens of Enlightenment rationalism, imagined a deep valley between the grandeur of Rome and the brilliance of their own age. They painted the centuries in between with shadows cast, ironically, by the very torchlight they claimed to bear. According to this grim narrative, the withdrawal of Roman legions from the fringes of empire, across Europe into Asia Minor and northern Africa, marked a collapse not just of political structure, but of civilization itself. The departure of Pax Romani, with its tightly bound roads, regulated trade, aqueducts, libraries, and courts of law, was imagined to be like the extinguishing of the sun. Left behind, they argued, was a Europe fragmented, ruled by petty warlords and feudal tyrants, populated by illiterate peasants shivering in their crumbling villages, as if 1,000 years had passed in mute confusion. This image was then further darkened by the undeniable catastrophe of the Black Death. In wave after wave, the plague tore through Europe's towns and hamlets, taking with it an estimated 1/3, perhaps more, of the population. Families vanished, farms were abandoned, the very rhythm of life seemed broken. And yet, while the tragedy of the plague is an unchallenged fact, the conclusion that it left only devastation and despair in its wake is far from complete. The Roman Empire did decline, but it did not crash like a toppled statue. It faded slowly across generations. Its administrative models, its legal codes, its language, its architecture and engineering, and even its literature. These survived. They endured not in museums or memory, but in living form, woven into the royal courts of the Franks, the Visigoths, the Byzantine, and beyond. The Church carried Latin forward in scripture and learning. Roman roads were repaired, reused. Roman walls were built upon, and Roman ideas of law, of order, of empire, still pulsed beneath the new medieval skin of Europe. It is therefore not only misleading, but unfair to depict the centuries that followed as wholly regressive or devoid of progress. Certainly, there was violence and hardship, but these were not unique to the medieval era. Tyranny, superstition, and suffering are companions to all ages. What must be remembered, and what is too often forgotten, is that the Middle Ages were also a period of profound adaptation, invention, and quiet endurance. In the face of pandemic and collapse, people found new ways to live. In the ruins of one world, they built the foundations of another. The Black Death, while horrific, also reshaped society, bringing an end to rigid feudal bonds, giving rise to a more mobile, wage-based economy. With fewer hands to work the fields, labor became valuable. Rights were demanded, contracts were written, markets emerged. This era saw the preservation of knowledge by cloistered monks, the beginnings of universities, the poetry of courtly love, the philosophical stirrings that would become scholasticism, and the steady progress in fields such as agriculture, architecture, navigation, and astronomy. Even as the world shrank under plague, it expanded in imagination and ambition. So before we let our minds be lulled to sleep by the easy myths of a dark and hopeless time, let us reconsider. Let us look again, more gently, more patiently. Let us not forget the candle burning in quiet monasteries, the wheels turning in nascent towns, the hands that rebuilt, sewed, studied, and dreamed. In what follows, I will walk you through the often overlooked features of the European Middle Ages. Features that, taken together, suggest that it was not such a terrible time to be alive after all. 1. Whilst the Black Death did undoubtedly kill off 1/3 of the European population and cause severe labor shortages resulting in much farmland reverting back to wilderness, it also created significant opportunities which quietly and perhaps unexpectedly helped shape the modern world. What appeared to be the end of everything familiar was, in its quieter ripples, the beginning of something transformative. The sudden disappearance of so many lives left not only grief, but also an unspoken invitation to change. Entire villages were left abandoned, yes, but with them, rigid hierarchies began to crumble. The land no longer echoed solely with the commands of the few. For the first time, the many, the peasant, the tenant farmer, the widow, found themselves with newfound leverage in the negotiation of daily life. The value of a human being's labor, previously dictated by duty and birth, began to shift towards something resembling agency. Out of devastation rose possibility, and from loss, the seeds of modern economies were sown. 2. The shortage of labor created a market for human effort, a fragile and uncertain one at first, but one that would grow and define the fabric of Europe for centuries to come. Peasants who once worked land not their own, bound to lords and to custom, now found themselves able to demand compensation. No longer shackled by the rigid mutual obligations of feudal service, many began exchanging time for coin. This quiet revolution transformed feudalism from a system of land and loyalty to a proto-capitalist model where services and labor could be monetized. Lords, faced with the absence of manpower, had little choice but to adapt. Where once knights pledged crops or swords, now they offered payments. This monetary evolution led, in time, to the emergence of early banking systems in the bustling merchant towns of northern Italy. Letters of credit, ledgers, and lenders began to replace oaths and obligations. From these systems came the foundation stones of modern capitalism, the unseen scaffolding of today's financial world, born not in boardrooms, but in the empty fields of a post-plague continent. 3. The church, often cast as the chief architect of suppression, in fact preserved the flickering torchlight of the ancient world. Far from extinguishing the knowledge of antiquity, monasteries across Europe became its most careful custodians. Through the long centuries, robed monks hunched over worn parchments, painstakingly copying, illuminating, preserving, in cold scriptoria lit by flickering oil lamps. The thoughts of Aristotle, Cicero, and Galen were given new breath. It is a myth, a compelling one, but a myth nonetheless, that the Renaissance represented a rediscovery. In truth, the knowledge had never been truly lost. It had simply waited, sheltered, protected, awaiting a moment when the world outside the cloister would once again be ready to listen. Moreover, the Renaissance itself was not a sudden European awakening, but a cross-cultural echo, one shaped as much by Islamic scholars as by Latin scribes. Through the vibrant trade networks and intellectual exchanges of Moorish Spain, the Arab world brought with it an invaluable gift. Preserved texts, enhanced philosophies, and brilliant minds. Poets in Damascus, astronomers in Cairo, engineers in Baghdad, all were part of a luminous intellectual chain stretching across continents. Their engagement with the works of the ancients wasn't mere replication, it was reinvention. They challenged ideas, improved upon them, translated them into new contexts. When Europe finally stirred from its provincial sleep, it did not wake alone. It awoke hand in hand with the scholars of the East. The 12th century Renaissance was not born in isolation. It was born of contact, of curiosity, and of a quiet, persistent hunger for understanding. 5. And it was within this environment of preservation and cross-pollination that Europe laid the bricks of its first universities. Paris, Bologna, Oxford. These were not merely halls of theology, but homes of dialectic, of logic, of inquiry. Students pored over Aristotle and Augustine alike. And amidst these stone walls, something subtle yet powerful occurred. The transformation of medieval thought into systematic learning. Ideas became examinable, knowledge a shared resource. Courtly love and the code of chivalry, often romanticized, also served to temper violence with ritual and discipline, civilizing the unruly world of medieval politics. Not all were equal, of course, but women like Christine de Pizan proved that the feminine voice, though rare, could ring out strong, literate, and unapologetic. Even without the mechanical might of Rome, the Middle Ages invented. They experimented. They observed. Glassmaker ground lenses that saw stars, while alchemists unwittingly prepared the groundwork for chemistry. These were not the lost years. They were, in their own quiet way, the learning years. 6. To be sure, it was not a paradise. The Mongol hordes scarred the land with their relentless advance. Local tyrants and endemic violence made daily life fragile. Disease revisited again and again. Life was shorter, harder, riskier. Yet many of the horrors we often associate with the medieval mindset, witch hunts, systematic torture, genocidal conquest, arose not in these centuries, but later. The worst impulses of European power, its colonizing engines and empire-building cruelty, came with the Enlightenment, not the Abbey. The modern age, so proud of its knowledge, committed its own brand of darkness. 7. And so, as we close this reflection, let us set aside the simplistic label of Dark Ages and embrace a more nuanced, kinder understanding. The Middle Ages were neither golden nor grim in full. They were complex, human, and they deserve to be remembered not as a void between empires, but as a bridge, a time of survival, transition, and subtle evolution. So now, with the echoes of the past still gently circling your thoughts, let your breath soften and your eyes begin to close. The so-called awful Middle Ages were, like all ages, a tapestry of shadow and light, of suffering, yes, but also of strength, survival, and quiet progress. A time when candles still flickered in stone monasteries, when hands tilled the earth with purpose, and when even in plague and hardship, the spirit of humanity pressed slowly forward. History is never a single voice. It is a quiet chorus. Tonight, you've heard one of its softer songs. And as your body settles into stillness, remember, the world didn't stop spinning when Rome fell, nor did the stars vanish from the sky. Life simply changed shape and continued, as it always does, in silence, in resilience, in sleep. So drift now. Let the weight of the centuries slip away. Let your mind float, calm and unhurried. through time's gentle current. You are safe here, in the quiet spaces between fact and dream. The night is long, but so is history, and both, if you listen closely, can lull you home. Good night. Sleep deeply.